Get your dirty hands off my table. Richard Hartwell snarled as Keisha Williams reached to refill his water glass at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. The tech billionaire shoved her hand away roughly, causing water to splash across his mathematical equations scribbled on expensive napkins. "Look what you've done!" He stood up, towering over her. "This proof stumped MIT's finest for months." Hartwell held up the wet napkin, speaking loudly so other diners could hear. "Solve this. I'll give you everything I own." He laughed mockingly at his own words. Then he deliberately swept his arm across the table. Salt, pepper, and crystal glasses crashed to the marble floor in an explosive mess. "Now clean it up. That's what your people are good for." As Keisha knelt among the shattered glass, her brilliant mind absorbed every number from his soggy napkins. While he humiliated her publicly, she was quietly solving what he believed impossible. 3 blocks away from Le Bernardin, Lincoln Center's Avery Fisher Hall buzzed with anticipation. Tonight marked the 15th annual $1 Million Math Challenge, where America's wealthiest minds gathered to pose unsolvable problems to the world's brightest mathematicians. The rules were deceptively simple. Billionaire sponsors presented mathematical challenges that had stumped their research teams for months or years. Any contestant who solved a problem won the corresponding prize money. The twist? These weren't ordinary math problems. They were cutting-edge research questions worth millions in patents and breakthroughs. Richard Hartwell had never lost. In 15 years as head judge, his challenges remained undefeated. His reputation wasn't built on luck. The man had legitimately solved variations of Fermat's last theorem and built a tech empire on mathematical algorithms that revolutionized artificial intelligence. But tonight felt different. The stakes were higher than ever before. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Sarah Carter announced from the podium, her voice carrying across the packed auditorium, "this year's total prize pool exceeds $50 million. The audience erupted in applause. "Our contestants include PhD mathematicians from Harvard, MIT, Cambridge, and Oxford." Cameras rolled as CNN prepared for their live global broadcast. Social media buzzed with hashtags. Mathematical genius was about to become prime-time entertainment for 300 million viewers worldwide. Back at Le Bernardin, Keisha Williams finished mopping up the mess Hartwell had created. Her manager, Giuseppe, grabbed her arm as she headed to the kitchen. "You stay invisible tonight," he hissed in her ear. "Those VIP guests decide whether this restaurant keeps its reputation. One wrong move and you're gone." Keisha nodded silently. She needed this job. Her grandmother's medical bills weren't paying themselves, and her student loans from MIT still haunted her credit score. 3 years ago, she'd been 1 semester away from her mathematics doctorate when financial reality crashed down. Her father's construction accident, her mother's diabetes medication, her younger brother's autism therapy costs. Numbers that added up to an impossible choice. MIT or family. She'd chosen family. Now she cleaned up after people who would never know she'd once published original research in topology theory. Her professors had called her work revolutionary. Her thesis advisor had predicted a Nobel Prize someday. None of that mattered when you couldn't afford tuition. Giuseppe disappeared back into the kitchen, leaving Keisha alone with the VIP section's dirty dishes and shattered dreams. But as she cleared tables, fragments of conversations drifted over from nearby diners. "Hartwell's challenge this year is supposed to be impossible," whispered a woman in diamonds. "Something about infinite sequences and convergence theory." "My husband's research team spent 2 years on it," replied her companion. "They're calling it the convergence paradox. No solution exists." Keisha's hands stilled on the wine glasses she was collecting. Convergence theory? She'd written her undergraduate thesis on convergence patterns in infinite series. Her mind automatically began working through potential approaches, muscle memory from years of mathematical training kicking in despite her current circumstances. More fragments reached her ears as she moved between tables. "The preliminary problems are just warm-ups," a man was explaining to his date. "Real challenge comes at the end. Hartwell always saves his impossible proof for last." What makes him so confident nobody can solve it? Because he's Richard Hartwell. The man's never been wrong about mathematics, ever. Keisha felt something stir in her chest. Not anger exactly, more like recognition. She knew that feeling of absolute mathematical certainty, that moment when patterns clicked into place with undeniable clarity. She'd experienced it herself during late nights in MIT's library, solving problems that had stumped her professors. But she also knew something Hartwell apparently didn't. Mathematical brilliance didn't announce itself with degrees or bank accounts. It whispered in the minds of people others overlooked. And sometimes, just sometimes, those whispers contained truths that the loudest voices missed. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. The $1 Million Math Challenge was starting in 1 hour. Lincoln Center's doors were opening to the public for viewing parties in the lobby where giant screens would broadcast the competition live. Giuseppe emerged from the kitchen, scanning the dining room. "Williams, table 12 needs their check. Move!" As Keisha hurried to comply, her mathematical mind was already 3 steps ahead. She had exactly 43 minutes left on her shift. Lincoln Center was a 12-minute walk from the restaurant. The competition's preliminary round would begin in 55 minutes. Would she have the courage to step out of the shadows and into the light where her true abilities could shine? Keisha's hands trembled as she untied her apron in the restaurant's back alley. Her shift had ended 3 minutes ago. Lincoln Center's golden lights beckoned from just 12 blocks away, but each step felt like crossing an ocean. She wasn't supposed to be here. The $1 Million Math Challenge wasn't for people like her. People who served coffee instead of discovering theorems. People who counted tips instead of publishing papers. But Richard Hartwell's soggy napkin was folded in her pocket, his equations burned into her memory. She'd found his error within 30 seconds of studying the scribbled proof. The man who'd humiliated her had made a fundamental mistake that any decent mathematician should have caught. Lincoln Center's lobby was packed with curious onlookers watching giant screens broadcasting the competition. Keisha slipped through the crowd, her server's uniform drawing dismissive glances from well-dressed spectators. On screen, Dr. Sarah Carter was introducing the final 3 contestants: Dr. Marcus Webb from Harvard's Mathematics Department, Dr. Elena Kowalski from Oxford, and Dr. James Liu from MIT, her former classmate who'd finished the program she'd been forced to abandon. "Before we begin the final challenge," Dr. Carter announced, "Mr. Hartwell would like to address our global audience." The camera panned to Richard Hartwell, immaculate in his tailored suit, standing confidently at center stage. He held up a sheet of paper covered in complex equations. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed across the auditorium, "tonight I present the convergence paradox. My research team has spent 3 years developing this proof. It demonstrates that certain infinite sequences cannot converge under any known mathematical framework." The audience leaned forward. This was why they came, to witness mathematical history in the making. Hartwell's eyes gleamed with absolute certainty. "This proof has been verified by teams at Stanford, Caltech, and Princeton. It represents the absolute limit of human mathematical understanding." He paused for dramatic effect. "If anyone, and I mean anyone in this room, can find even the smallest error in this proof." The billionaire's voice grew louder, his arrogance filling every corner of the massive hall. "If anyone can solve this paradox that has stumped the world's greatest mathematical minds, I will personally write them a check for everything I own. My companies, my properties, my entire fortune, $50 billion. The audience gasped. Social media exploded. This wasn't just a mathematical challenge anymore. This was the bet of the century. Keisha felt her heart hammering against her ribs. In her pocket, Hartwell's napkin seemed to burn against her fingertips. She knew exactly where his proof failed. The error wasn't complex or subtle. It was embarrassingly basic, a sign convention mistake in the 7th equation that invalidated his entire framework, but she was nobody. A dropout, a waitress. Who would believe her? Dr. Carter stepped forward with legal documents. "Mr. Hartwell, this is highly unusual. Are you certain about this challenge?" "Absolutely," Hartwell declared. "I'm so confident in my proof that I'm willing to stake everything on it, because mathematics doesn't lie, Dr. Carter. And neither do I." The camera captured his smugness perfectly as he surveyed the stunned audience. 300 million viewers watched him place his signature on the legal guarantee. Lawyers scrambled to process the paperwork. This was no longer a competition. It was a public execution of mathematical pride. In the lobby, Keisha closed her eyes and made a choice that would change everything. She began pushing through the crowd toward the auditorium entrance. Security guards blocked her path. Excuse me, miss. This area is for registered contestants and VIP guests only. Would a former MIT mathematics student have the courage to challenge the most arrogant man in America? I said this area is restricted, the security guard repeated, his hand moving toward his radio. You need to return to the public viewing area immediately. Keisha's voice came out steadier than she felt. I need to speak with Dr. Carter. It's about mathematical proof. The guard laughed. Lady, half the people here think they can solve million-dollar math problems. That's not how this works. But Sarah Carter had noticed the commotion near the entrance. Something about the young woman's quiet confidence caught her attention. As head of Princeton's mathematics department, she'd learned to recognize genuine mathematical intuition. It rarely announced itself with arrogance. What seems to be the problem? Dr. Carter approached with curiosity rather than annoyance. Keisha pulled Hartwell's soggy napkin from her pocket. There's an error in equation 7 of the convergence paradox. The sign convention switches from positive to negative iteration without justification. The auditorium fell silent. 300 million viewers watched through cameras as a woman in a server's uniform challenged the world's most confident mathematician. Dr. Carter examined the napkin, her eyebrows rising. These weren't random scribbles. The margins contained elegant derivations, shortcuts that most graduate students would miss. Where did you study mathematics? MIT. 3 years of doctoral program before... Keisha's voice trailed off. The reason didn't matter now. Hartwell's laughter boomed across the stage. Security! Remove this delusional woman immediately. I don't have time for desperate people seeking attention. But Dr. Carter raised her hand. Mr. Hartwell, she's identified a specific error. As competition director, I'm obligated to verify any mathematical challenge to your proof. This is ridiculous, Hartwell snarled. That woman was serving me coffee 2 hours ago. She probably can't balance a checkbook, let alone understand advanced mathematics. The crowd murmured with uncomfortable recognition. Many had seen her at Le Bernardin. The irony was delicious. The same person he'd humiliated was now questioning his mathematical supremacy. Dr. Carter walked to the giant display screen. Miss Williams, Keisha Williams. Miss Williams, please explain your objection to equation 7. Keisha's hands shook as she approached the microphone. The auditorium stretched before her like an ocean of judgment. But mathematics had always been her safe harbor, the one place where truth mattered more than appearances. In equation 7, Mr. Hartwell assumes positive iteration when establishing the convergence boundary, she began, her voice growing stronger. But in step 12, he switches to negative iteration without adjusting the asymptotic behavior. She moved to the whiteboard beside the main screen, borrowed a marker, and began writing with fluid precision. If you're iterating positively, your limit approaches positive infinity along this trajectory. Her hand moved confidently across the board, sketching curves and mathematical symbols. But negative iteration creates a completely different convergence pattern. The limit actually approaches 2.847, not 0, as his proof claims. The 3 PhD contestants exchanged glances. Dr. Webb from Harvard grabbed his calculator, fingers flying across the keys. Dr. Kowalski from Oxford pulled out her laptop, running rapid calculations. Dr. Liu from MIT stared at the whiteboard with growing recognition. She's right, Dr. Liu whispered, loud enough for his microphone to catch. The asymptotic behavior completely changes with negative iteration. Dr. Carter quickly verified the calculation on her tablet. Her face showed surprise, then something approaching awe. The correction is mathematically sound. Hartwell's face flushed red. This is impossible. My team spent 3 years on this proof. We had it reviewed by experts at Stanford, Caltech, Princeton. Sometimes, Keisha said quietly, the most obvious errors are the hardest to see when you're too close to the problem. The auditorium erupted. Social media exploded with clips of the unknown waitress schooling a billionaire mathematician. #Waitress genius began trending worldwide within minutes. But Hartwell wasn't finished. Anyone can point out arithmetic errors, he snapped. That doesn't make her a mathematician. This was lucky at best. Dr. Carter studied her tablet screen where additional calculations were running. Mr. Hartwell, this wasn't arithmetic. Miss Williams identified a fundamental conceptual error in convergence theory. Her correction opens an entirely new approach to infinite series analysis. The three PhD contestants were now huddled together, sketching variations of Keisha's correction on their scratch paper. What she'd revealed in 30 seconds was reshaping their understanding of problems they'd struggled with for years. Furthermore, Dr. Carter continued, her mathematical notation suggests advanced training. These techniques aren't taught at undergraduate level. Hartwell's confidence wavered for the first time in 15 years. My team will need to verify this independently. Of course, Dr. Carter agreed. But according to competition rules, any valid mathematical objection to the primary proof requires the challenger to proceed to the next level of difficulty. The audience held its breath. Keisha had passed the first test, but the real challenges were still ahead. Hartwell's eyes narrowed with renewed malice. Fine. If this woman thinks she's so clever, let's see how she handles problems that actually matter. Dr. Carter, present the secondary challenges. Miss Williams, Dr. Carter addressed her directly, are you prepared to compete in the formal competition? The next 3 problems increase in difficulty significantly. Keisha looked out at the sea of faces. Some showed curiosity, others skepticism, a few displayed outright hostility. But scattered throughout the audience, she saw something else. Hope. People who, like her, had been underestimated and overlooked were leaning forward in their seats. I'm ready, she said simply. But as Dr. Carter prepared the next challenge, Hartwell was already planning his revenge. This wasn't just about mathematics anymore. This was about destroying the woman who dared to make him look foolish in front of the entire world. Could a former MIT dropout survive what was coming next? Dr. Carter raised her hand to quiet the buzzing auditorium. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an unprecedented situation. Miss Williams has successfully identified a fundamental error in tonight's primary challenge. The camera zoomed in on Keisha's face as she stood beside the whiteboard, marker still in her trembling hand. Her server's uniform looked absurdly out of place among the formal academic setting, but her mathematical work spoke louder than any credentials. According to competition rules, Dr. Carter continued, any challenger who identifies errors in preliminary proofs advances to the formal competition tier. Hartwell stepped forward, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Dr. Carter, I demand we verify her background first. This woman has no business competing against legitimate mathematicians. My business, Keisha said quietly into her microphone, is mathematics. And mathematics doesn't care about my uniform. The audience erupted in applause. Social media feeds exploded with clips of her response. Mathematics doesn't care about your uniform began trending alongside Waitress genius. But Hartwell wasn't backing down. Fine, if you want to play this game, let's raise the stakes. He gestured to his lawyers who were frantically typing on laptops in the front row. Dr. Carter, I'm formally modifying my challenge. Mr. Hartwell, that's highly irregular. I'm doubling my wager, Hartwell declared, his voice carrying across the silent hall. $100 billion. Everything I own, plus my company's combined assets. He pointed directly at Keisha. But now she has to solve 3 problems, not 1, and she gets only 60 minutes total. The auditorium gasped. The 3 PhD contestants looked stunned. This wasn't just mathematical competition anymore. This was financial warfare. Dr. Carter checked her tablet, scrolling through competition regulations. The rules do allow for modified challenges if all parties consent. I accept, Keisha said before Dr. Carter could finish. You don't understand what you're agreeing to, Dr. Webb from Harvard warned her. These aren't textbook problems. They're cutting-edge research questions that teams of mathematicians work on for years. But Keisha's eyes were fixed on Hartwell. She'd seen that look before, the absolute certainty that he was about to crush someone he considered beneath him. The same look he'd worn while grinding his shoe into her foot and calling her people contaminated. Furthermore, Hartwell continued, sensing victory, the competition will now be broadcast live to global news networks. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, everyone will watch this woman fail spectacularly. Dr. Carter looked concerned. Miss Williams, you're not obligated to accept these modifications. The original challenge stands if you prefer. No, Keisha said firmly. I accept his terms, all of them. The viewing audience had grown from 300 million to over 500 million as news of the unprecedented challenge spread worldwide. In Le Bernardin, Giuseppe and the kitchen staff were crowded around a tablet, watching their former waitress face down America's most arrogant billionaire. "Is she insane?" Giuseppe muttered. "That man will destroy her." But in nursing homes and community colleges, in night shift break rooms and single-parent apartments, people who'd been overlooked and underestimated were gathering around screens with growing hope. Dr. Carter announced the new rules. 3 problems, 60 minutes total. Miss Williams will work at the main board. The existing contestants will compete simultaneously for comparison purposes. And when she fails, Hartwell added with a cruel smile, I want her to admit publicly that she's nothing but a fraud seeking attention. I want her to apologize to every viewer for wasting their time. The cruelty of the demand hit the audience like a slap. Even his supporters seemed uncomfortable with the unnecessary humiliation clause. "And when will I succeed?" Keisha asked. Hartwell laughed. "You won't. But if I do?" His lawyers were frantically trying to signal him to stop, but his arrogance had taken complete control. "If you somehow solve all 3 problems, which is mathematically impossible, then yes, you get everything. $100 billion and a public apology from me." The contracts were hastily rewritten and signed, cameras positioned for optimal angles, social media platforms crashed under the viewing load as word spread globally. Dr. Carter approached Keisha privately during the setup. "Are you certain about this? There's no shame in competing under the original terms." "There's shame in staying silent when someone thinks they can humiliate you without consequences," Keisha replied. "I've been quiet too long." As technicians finished positioning cameras and microphones, Hartwell made one final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to witness the difference between real mathematical genius and desperate delusion. Watch carefully as this woman embarrasses herself in front of the entire world." But something had changed in Keisha's posture. The trembling hands were steady now. The uncertain voice had grown strong. She approached the massive whiteboard like a concert pianist approaching her instrument. The timer was set. The problems were sealed. 500 million people held their breath. Would the woman who cleaned up Hartwell's messes be able to clean up his mathematics as well? The 60-minute countdown began with a thunderous beep that echoed across Lincoln Center. Dr. Carter broke the seal on the first envelope, revealing Problem 1, Advanced Probability Theory with Quantum Applications. Keisha read the problem once, twice, then smiled slightly. The PhD contestants were already frantically scribbling equations, but she stood motionless for 30 seconds, absorbing the mathematical landscape in her mind. While Dr. Webb from Harvard struggled with the opening setup, Keisha identified an elegant shortcut. Instead of brute forcing through 17 variables, she recognized the problem as a disguised Markov chain. Her marker moved across the board with fluid precision, cutting through complexity like a knife through silk. The audience leaned forward. Even Hartwell looked surprised at her speed, but social media was brutal. Anonymous accounts flooded Twitter with attacks. "Fake waitress getting lucky. This is staged for views. She's probably getting answers through an earpiece." The hate was immediate and vicious. Meanwhile, Giuseppe from Le Bernardin was fielding phone calls from news outlets. "She was always strange," he told reporters, muttering numbers to herself, scribbling on napkins during breaks. "We thought she might be mentally unstable." Dr. Carter opened the second envelope. Problem 2, Topological Manifolds and Differential Geometry. This was Keisha's specialty from MIT. She'd published undergraduate research on manifold theory that her professors had called revolutionary. Her approach was so unconventional that Dr. Kowalski from Oxford stopped her own work to watch. "She's using Riemann mapping in reverse," Dr. Liu whispered to his microphone. "That's actually brilliant." The cameras caught the amazement on the PhD contestants' faces. Here was someone thinking beyond their textbook approaches, finding pathways through mathematical landscapes they'd never considered. But Hartwell seized the moment for psychological warfare. "Ladies and gentlemen, let me share what I discovered about our challenger during the break." His voice dripped with manufactured concern. "Miss Williams was expelled from MIT for academic misconduct." The lie hit Keisha like a physical blow. She stumbled, nearly dropping her marker. The audience murmured with uncertainty. Her mathematical momentum shattered. "That's not true," she said quietly, but her microphone barely picked it up. "My sources at MIT confirm it," Hartwell continued smoothly. "Plagiarism accusations. That's why she never finished her doctorate." In living rooms across America, viewers were switching between believing and doubting. The story felt too perfect, too much like a fairy tale. Surely waitresses couldn't solve problems that stumped PhD holders. "Doctor," Carter intervened with quiet authority. "Mr. Hartwell, unless you have documentation, such accusations are inappropriate." She approached Keisha's board, studying the work. "Miss Williams, your topological approach here is genuinely original. I've never seen this particular mapping technique." The validation steadied Keisha's nerves. Mathematics didn't lie even when people did, but the damage was spreading faster than her solutions. News outlets began running exclusive mystery mathematicians' troubled past headlines. Cable news shows hosted experts who questioned whether the entire event was staged for ratings. "Nobody jumps from serving coffee to solving research-level mathematics," declared a Yale professor on CNN. "The human brain doesn't work that way." 27 minutes remaining. The third problem was still sealed, 2 problems solved but barely. Keisha finished problem 2 with a flourish, her solution so elegant that the 3 PhD contestants applauded spontaneously. Even they recognized mathematical beauty when they saw it. Her work showed insights that graduate programs typically took years to develop. But Hartwell's legal team was working phones frantically. "We're getting reports that her solutions might be pre-programmed," one lawyer announced loudly enough for cameras to catch. "This level of speed suggests technological assistance or prior knowledge." Security guards began inspecting the stage area, checking for hidden devices. The implication was clear. No legitimate contestant could perform at this level without cheating. The pressure cooker was intensifying. Camera angles multiplied. The global audience had grown to 700 million people. Social media platforms were buckling under the traffic load. Hashmath Genius and Waitress fraud was trending simultaneously. "Doctor." Carter opened the final envelope with ceremony. Problem 3, the infinite bridge paradox, Hartwell's personal masterpiece that had stumped research teams for years. Keisha read it once and felt something click into place in her mind. This wasn't just mathematics. This was 3 separate mathematical disciplines disguised as a single problem: number theory, topology, and convergence analysis, all woven together in a tapestry that looked impossible until you found the right perspective. But then disaster struck. Her calculator malfunctioned. The screen flickered and died, leaving her without computational support for the most complex calculations of her life. "Technical difficulties happen." Hartwell shrugged with false sympathy. "Perhaps we should postpone while we find her a working calculator?" The audience was fracturing into camps. Supporters chanted, "Let her work," while skeptics called for verification of her identity. The mathematical community was split between fascination and suspicion. "I don't need a calculator," Keisha announced, her voice carrying new strength. "Mathematics existed long before electronic computation." She turned to the massive whiteboard and began working purely from mental calculation. Her mind processed numbers with the same fluidity that concert pianists read complex musical scores. Viewers watched in amazement as she performed calculations that most people needed computers to verify. With 8 minutes remaining, Keisha's exhaustion was showing. The mental strain of solving research-level mathematics while enduring public character assassination had pushed her to her limits. Her handwriting grew shakier, her explanations less fluid. Hartwell sensed weakness. "This is what happens when desperation meets reality," he announced to the cameras. "Watch her collapse under pressure she was never qualified to handle." 7 minutes left, no calculator, global skepticism, character assassination, physical exhaustion, the weight of 700 million people's expectations pressing down on her shoulders. But as Keisha stared at the infinite bridge paradox, something remarkable happened. All the noise faded away. The jeers, the cameras, the pressure, none of it mattered anymore. There was only mathematics. Pure, beautiful, undeniable mathematics. She saw the bridge that connected all 3 problems. She understood why Hartwell's teams had failed for years. They'd been trying to solve one impossible problem when they should have been solving 3 elegant ones. The solution required thinking beyond traditional frameworks. She needed to approach the problem not as a mathematician, but as an artist, seeing patterns where others saw chaos. Her marker began moving across the board with renewed energy. Not the frantic scribbling of someone under pressure, but the confident strokes of someone who had found her way home. 6 minutes remaining. Minutes. The final battle was about to begin. Could pure mathematical intuition triumph over computational power and institutional prejudice? 5 minutes remained when Dr. Carter received an urgent message on her tablet. She read it twice, her expression shifting from confusion to something approaching shock. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice cutting through the auditorium's tension. "I've just received communication from the International Mathematics Consortium. They need to make an immediate disclosure about tonight's competition." The camera zoomed in on her face as she continued reading. Hartwell looked annoyed by the interruption, but something in Dr. Carter's tone suggested this wasn't routine. "The infinite bridge paradox that Mr. Hartwell presented tonight." Dr. Carter paused, glancing at her tablet again. "According to documentation just submitted by MIT, Cambridge, and Princeton, this problem was designed specifically to be unsolvable using conventional mathematical approaches." A murmur rippled through the audience. The PhD contestants stopped their frantic calculations and looked up from their work. The problem was created as part of a research initiative to identify mathematicians who think beyond traditional frameworks. It requires what the consortium calls intuitive pattern synthesis, the ability to see mathematical relationships that pure computational analysis cannot detect. Hartwell's face went pale. This wasn't part of his plan. Dr. Carter continued. "Furthermore, the consortium reveals that Mr. Hartwell's own solution, developed over 3 years, relied heavily on quantum computing algorithms and AI-assisted pattern recognition. No human mathematician has ever solved this problem using manual calculation alone." The auditorium fell silent. 700 million viewers were witnessing the rules of engagement completely change. "This means," Dr. Carter said carefully, "that Miss Williams is attempting something that has never been accomplished in the history of modern mathematics. She's working without any computational assistance on a problem specifically designed to require technological augmentation." Hartwell stepped forward, panic creeping into his voice. "Dr. Carter, this disclosure is highly inappropriate. The competition parameters were clearly established. Actually, Mr. Hartwell, the consortium's letter indicates that you were aware of the problem's special classification when you selected it tonight. The question they're raising is whether it was ethical to present an unsolvable challenge without disclosure." The twist hit everyone simultaneously. Hartwell hadn't just been arrogant, he'd been deliberately setting up an impossible scenario. He'd chosen a problem that required technological assistance specifically because he knew no human could solve it manually. But Keisha Williams was still working at the whiteboard, completely absorbed in her calculations. She was 4 minutes away from attempting something that the world's mathematical establishment considered impossible. The global audience was no longer just watching a competition. They were witnessing a woman challenge the very limits of human mathematical capability. Had Hartwell's arrogance finally trapped him in a web of his own making? The revelation hit Keisha like a physical blow. She stopped mid-calculation, her marker frozen against the whiteboard. The problem she'd been confidently solving for the past hour wasn't just difficult. It was designed to be impossible for human minds to solve. "No human has ever solved this manually." Dr. Carter's words echoed in her head like a death sentence. Around her, the PhD contestants had already given up. Dr. Webb from Harvard shook his head in defeat. "If it requires quantum computing, there's no point continuing." Dr. Kowalski from Oxford closed her notebook with resignation. Even Dr. Liu from MIT, who'd been supportive of Keisha's unconventional approaches, stepped away from his board. But the worst part was watching the global audience lose faith in real time. Social media sentiment shifted from curiosity to pity. She's been set up to fail. Hartwell planned this humiliation from the beginning. No one could solve an impossible problem. 3 minutes and 40 seconds remained on the countdown timer, but it might as well have been 0. How do you solve a problem that the world's greatest mathematical minds, assisted by the most powerful computers, considered beyond human capability? Keisha stared at her work on the whiteboard. All her calculations suddenly felt meaningless. She'd identified the 3 separate mathematical disciplines hidden within the paradox. number theory, topology, and convergence analysis. She'd found elegant connections between them. But if the problem required technological assistance that she didn't have, then all her insights were worthless. The auditorium was no longer silent with anticipation. It was silent with sympathy. 700 million people were watching her inevitable failure, and she could feel their pity radiating through the cameras. "Miss Williams," Dr. Carter approached gently. "Given this new information about the problem's classification, no one would fault you for stepping away. What you've accomplished tonight is already remarkable." Keisha looked at Dr. Carter, then at the expectant faces in the audience. She saw Giuseppe from Le Bernardin smirking on a video call, probably telling reporters that he'd known she was delusional all along. She saw Hartwell's lawyers furiously working their phones, likely preparing damage control statements about how their client had been protecting the integrity of mathematics by exposing fraudulent claims. But worst of all, she saw the disappointment in the eyes of people who'd believed in her. The night shift workers who'd paused their jobs to watch. The single mothers who'd seen themselves in her struggle. The students who'd been told they weren't smart enough. They'd invested their hope in her impossible dream, and now she was about to let them all down. "I can't do it," she whispered, her voice barely audible through the microphone. "I thought I could see the solution, but if it's impossible..." Her confidence, built up through years of mathematical study and natural intuition, crumbled completely. She was just a waitress who'd been foolish enough to believe she could compete with billionaires and PhDs. The humiliation burned through her chest like acid. Hartwell sensed his moment of triumph. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what happens when delusion meets reality. Miss Williams has been living in a fantasy where serving coffee qualifies her to solve problems that stump the world's finest minds." The cruelty in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just about mathematics anymore. It was about putting her back in what he considered her proper place. But then, cutting through the despair, came a voice that changed everything. "Keisha." Dr. Carter's voice was quiet but firm. She moved closer, speaking directly to her rather than the cameras. "Mathematics doesn't care about classifications or committees or what's supposed to be impossible. You've seen something in this problem that others haven't. Trust your mind." Dr. Carter gestured toward the whiteboard. "Look at your work. Really look at it. You haven't been solving 3 separate problems. You've been building something entirely new." Keisha turned back to her equations. Through her tears of frustration, she began to see what Dr. Carter meant. Her approach hadn't been following traditional mathematical pathways. She'd been creating bridges between disciplines that weren't supposed to connect. Maybe the problem wasn't that she lacked the right technology. Maybe the problem was that everyone else had been thinking about it wrong. 2 minutes and 15 seconds remained. Could she find the courage to attempt the impossible one more time? 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Keisha wiped her eyes and turned back to the whiteboard with renewed purpose. Dr. Carter was right. She hadn't been solving 3 separate problems. She'd been building something that had never existed before. The infinite bridge paradox wasn't about finding a single solution. It was about creating a mathematical language that could describe infinity itself. "I see it now," she whispered, her voice growing stronger. The marker moved across the board with fluid confidence as her mathematical intuition took complete control. While Hartwell and his team had spent 3 years using quantum computers to brute force their way through calculations, Keisha had been unconsciously developing something far more elegant. She wasn't computing the solution, she was discovering it. The first bridge connected number theory to topology. Where traditional mathematics saw infinite sequences as separate entities, Keisha recognized them as points on a continuous surface. Her hand moved rapidly, sketching mathematical curves that demonstrated how infinite series could be mapped onto geometric shapes. "She's treating infinity like a landscape?" Dr. Liu from MIT whispered in amazement. "Not a mathematical concept, but a physical space you can navigate." The second bridge linked topology to convergence analysis. Here, Keisha's approach became truly revolutionary. Instead of trying to prove convergence through limit calculations, she showed how mathematical functions could flow like rivers across the topological surface she'd created. The audience was mesmerized. Even people without mathematical training could see the beauty in her visual approach. She was making the abstract concrete, the impossible tangible. But Hartwell wasn't finished. "This is mathematical poetry, not rigorous proof," he announced desperately. "She's drawing pretty pictures instead of providing numerical solutions." Keisha paused in her work and faced him directly. The moment had arrived for the first of the 3 golden beats. "Your elegant solution has one small problem, Mr. Hartwell," she said calmly, her voice carrying across the silent auditorium. "You assumed that infinity is always infinite." The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Hartwell's face showed confusion, then alarm as he began to understand what she meant. "In your quantum-assisted proof, you treated all infinities as equivalent, but there are different kinds of infinity. Some are countable, others uncountable. Some converge, others diverge. The bridge you missed is that they're all connected. 90 seconds remaining." Keisha turned to complete the third and most crucial bridge, the synthesis that unified all 3 mathematical disciplines into a single, elegant framework. Her marker flew across the board, connecting equations with geometric shapes, linking abstract concepts with visual representations. She was operating on pure mathematical instinct now, her mind processing relationships that had never been formally described. The solution wasn't emerging from calculation. It was being born from intuition. "Incredible," Dr. Carter breathed. "She's created a unified field theory for infinite sequences." The 3 PhD contestants had stopped pretending to work and were simply watching in awe. Dr. Webb from Harvard was taking photographs of her work with his phone. Dr. Kowalski from Oxford was frantically scribbling notes, trying to follow her logic. 30 seconds. Keisha stepped back and surveyed her work. The entire massive whiteboard was covered with equations, diagrams, and connections that formed a coherent mathematical argument. But more than that, it was beautiful. The kind of mathematical beauty that reminded people why they'd fallen in love with numbers in the first place. "There," she said simply. "The infinite bridge paradox isn't a paradox at all. It's a map showing how different types of infinity connect to each other." The countdown timer reached 0. Silence filled Lincoln Center. Dr. Carter approached the board with her tablet, running verification algorithms against Keisha's work. The 3 PhD contestants crowded around, checking her logic step by step. The cameras captured every equation, every connection, every elegant leap of mathematical reasoning. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Carter spoke. "The mathematical reasoning is sound. Not only sound, but revolutionary. Miss Williams has created an entirely new approach to infinite series analysis." The auditorium erupted, but Hartwell wasn't ready to concede. "One professor's opinion doesn't constitute mathematical proof. I demand independent verification from multiple institutions." Dr. Carter nodded. "Of course. I've already sent Miss Williams' work to MIT, Stanford, Princeton, Cambridge, and Oxford. Their response should arrive momentarily." The tension was unbearable. 700 million people around the world held their breath as the mathematical establishment prepared to render its verdict on work created by a former waitress in less than 60 minutes. Dr. Carter's tablet chimed with incoming messages. She read the first one aloud. "MIT Mathematics Department, Williams' approach represents a paradigm shift in infinite series theory. We recommend immediate publication in the Journal of Mathematical Innovation." Another chime. "Stanford confirms the mathematical validity and notes applications to quantum field theory." Then Princeton, then Cambridge, then Oxford. Each message brought the same verdict. Keisha Williams had solved the impossible. The moment arrived for the second golden beat. Keisha faced the cameras directly, her voice calm and powerful. "The beautiful thing about mathematics is it doesn't care who you think deserves to be right." The auditorium fell completely silent. This wasn't just about solving a problem anymore. This was about truth confronting arrogance, merit defeating prejudice, brilliance refusing to be silenced by status. All eyes turned to Hartwell, the man who had built his reputation on mathematical supremacy, who had publicly wagered everything on his certainty, who had spent the evening humiliating the woman who had just proven him wrong. For 15 years, Richard Hartwell had never been defeated. For 15 years, he had been the undisputed champion of mathematical competition. But 15 years of arrogance had just met 60 minutes of pure genius. The camera zoomed in on his face as he stared at the whiteboard, understanding finally dawning. Keisha Williams hadn't just solved his impossible problem. She had revolutionized the mathematical foundation on which his entire career was built. The third golden beat was coming. The moment when arrogance would be forced to acknowledge brilliance, when prejudice would bow to truth, when the impossible would become undeniable. Would the most arrogant man in America find the courage to admit he had been defeated by the woman he had tried to destroy? The moment stretched like eternity. Hartwell stood frozen, staring at mathematical work that had just destroyed 15 years of his supremacy. But before he could speak, Dr. Carter's tablet chimed with an urgent message that would change everything once more. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying a mix of amazement and concern, "I've just received an extraordinary communication from the International Patent Office." The cameras swiveled toward her as she continued reading. "Miss Williams's solution methodology, it appears to have applications far beyond pure mathematics. Her unified approach to infinity analysis has immediate implications for quantum computing, artificial intelligence optimization, and cryptocurrency encryption protocols." A murmur rippled through the auditorium. This wasn't just academic mathematics anymore. The preliminary economic impact assessment suggests that companies implementing her mathematical framework could see efficiency improvements of 300 to 500% in computational processing. Hartwell's face went ashen. His entire tech empire was built on algorithms that Keisha's breakthrough had just made obsolete. "Furthermore," Dr. Carter continued, "the Patent Office is requesting immediate documentation of Miss Williams's methodology to prevent unauthorized commercial exploitation. They're estimating the potential intellectual property value at—" She paused, double-checking the figure on her screen. $200 billion. The auditorium exploded into chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. Camera crews were pushing forward for better angles. The 3 PhD contestants were frantically photographing the whiteboard before anyone could erase it. But the most stunning revelation was yet to come. Dr. Carter raised her hand in silence. "There's one more thing. The Mathematical Consortium has just informed me that tonight's competition was partially designed as a talent identification initiative. They've been searching for mathematicians capable of breakthrough thinking that transcends traditional computational approaches." She turned to face Keisha directly. "Miss Williams, they're formally inviting you to lead a new research institute dedicated to intuitive mathematics with full funding and academic support." The twist hit everyone simultaneously. This hadn't just been a competition. It had been a recruitment process. And the woman who'd been serving coffee 12 hours ago had just become the most sought-after mathematical mind in the world. But Hartwell still hadn't spoken. The man who'd wagered everything on his mathematical supremacy now faced a choice that would define the rest of his life. Would he honor his public commitment, or would his arrogance find one final way to avoid the consequences of his cruelty? The silence stretched across Lincoln Center like a held breath. 700 million people around the world waited for Richard Hartwell to speak the words that would complete the most extraordinary reversal in mathematical history. His lawyers were frantically whispering in his ear, probably advising him to find legal loopholes or claim the competition had been compromised. His associates had already begun backing away from him, sensing the shift in power dynamics. But Hartwell was staring at the whiteboard where Keisha Williams had created something that transcended his understanding. For the first time in his life, he was faced with mathematical brilliance that exceeded his own. The moment arrived for the third and final golden beat. His voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I need to verify the calculations myself." The audience held its breath as he approached Keisha's work, studying each equation, each connection, each elegant leap of reasoning. Minutes passed in complete silence. Finally, he stepped back from the board. When he turned to face the cameras, 15 years of mathematical arrogance had been replaced by something approaching humility. "Miss Williams," he said quietly, "your solution is correct, completely correct. You've solved advanced mathematical proofs that I could not, demonstrating superior mathematical intuition and problem-solving ability that I failed to recognize." The words seemed to physically pain him, but he continued. "I built my career on being right about mathematics. Today I learned something more valuable than being right. I learned how to be wrong with dignity." The auditorium erupted in thunderous applause. But the most powerful moment was watching Keisha's quiet grace in victory. No gloating, no revenge, just the serene confidence of someone who had proven that brilliance couldn't be silenced by prejudice. 6 months later, Dr. Keisha Williams stood in her new office at the Institute for Intuitive Mathematics, writing equations that would reshape humanity's understanding of infinity. The walls were decorated not with awards or accolades, but with pictures of students from underfunded schools whose mathematical talents she was now helping to discover. She kept one memento from that night at Lincoln Center: Hartwell's soggy napkin framed on her desk, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that genius often whispers in places where others refuse to listen. The final shot showed her teaching a classroom of diverse students, writing on a whiteboard with the same fluid confidence she'd shown that night. Above the board, a simple message: mathematics doesn't care about your uniform. It only cares about your courage to see what others cannot. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you look or where you work? Share your story in the comments below. Subscribe to Black Tale Stories for more incredible stories of people who proved the doubters wrong. Because genius isn't about where you start. It's about refusing to let anyone else define your limits. Remember, somewhere right now, the next revolutionary idea is forming in a mind that others might overlook. Make sure you're not one of the people doing the overlooking. Get on your knees, Grandma, now! Officer Daniels shoves Margaret Thompson against the police cruiser. Blood rushes to her face. 72 years of dignity crumbles in public view outside First National Bank. Daniels seizes her purse, violently dumps everything onto the hood. Wallet, keys, phone, ID card crashes to pavement. Officer Miller stomps on her license, grinds his heel. This account has millions. No way it belongs to someone like you. Margaret's voice doesn't waver. I've banked here since before you were born. Miller kicks her ID into the gutter. Got real identification? Or should we take this downtown? Margaret reaches for her phone. Daniels slaps her hand away. I said freeze! Her eyes blaze with something beyond anger. Calculation. Patience. Power. Little do they know who's waiting for Margaret's emergency call. Margaret parks her modest sedan in the bank's lot. She checks her appearance in the mirror. Pearl earrings, pressed blouse, hair neatly pinned. Today she'll withdraw funds for her grandson's college tuition. Inside First National Bank, customers receive prompt service. But when Margaret approaches the counter, teller Brian gives her a dismissive glance. How can I help you? His tone lacks the warmth he showed previous customers. I'd like to withdraw $15,000 from my account. Margaret slides her ID and bank card across the counter. Brian's eyebrows raise. He examines her ID closely, comparing it to her face multiple times. This is a significant sum. Do you understand what you're asking for? Margaret has held this account for decades. Yes, I understand banking transactions. Brian whispers to his manager, Sandra, who approaches with crossed arms. There seems to be a problem with your request. Margaret stands straight. What problem? We need to verify your identity further. These fraud prevention measures protect people like you. Margaret notices Sandra doesn't question the ID of the younger white customer at the next window, making a similar withdrawal. People like me? Margaret asks. Sandra ignores the question. Wait here. She disappears into a back office, Margaret's ID and bank card in hand. Through the window, Margaret sees Sandra speaking to security guards, who glance at her repeatedly. One guard makes a call, his eyes never leaving Margaret. Outside, a police cruiser pulls up. Margaret clutches her purse tighter. The retirement gift from her son rests inside, a special phone with a single button for emergencies. She never thought banking would become an emergency. The approaching officers have already decided what kind of woman Margaret is, and it's not the account holder of $1.2 million. Officers Daniels and Miller enter the bank. Sandra immediately directs them to Margaret. The bank falls silent. Other customers stare. Ma'am, step outside with us. Officer Daniels gestures toward the door. Margaret stands firm. I've done nothing wrong. I'm a customer, withdrawing my own money. Miller steps closer. We can do this the easy way or make a scene. Your choice. Margaret walks outside with dignity, her back straight despite her pounding heart. In the parking lot, away from witnesses, their tone changes. We've had several fraud cases involving elderly accounts. Daniels positions himself to block Margaret's path back to the bank. I'm simply withdrawing money for my grandson's tuition. Margaret opens her purse for her secondary ID. Miller misinterprets the movement. His hand moves to his weapon. Keep your hands where we can see them. Margaret freezes. I'm getting my passport. Slowly. Daniels watches her every move. She produces her passport, perfectly valid. Miller barely glances at it. This could be fake, too. These scammers have good forgeries now. Margaret's frustration builds. Call my son. He'll verify who I am. Daniels laughs. Everyone has a son who'll fix everything. Inside the bank, customers press against windows. No one intervenes. Sandra watches with arms crossed, vindicated. Margaret notices Brian looking uncomfortable but silent. I've banked here since before you were born, Margaret tells the officers. My late husband and I opened this account in 1980. Right, Miller says. And I'm sure you drive a Mercedes, too. Margaret thinks of her son's warning last Christmas. Mom, sometimes people won't see your worth until you show them your power. She hadn't understood then. She does now. As the officers radio for backup, they don't notice Margaret's fingers carefully pressing the emergency button on her phone. The situation intensifies as a small crowd gathers at a distance. Officer Daniels demands Margaret's purse. We need to check for false identification documents. Margaret holds her ground. You have no right to search my belongings without cause. Obstruction, Miller mutters. That's cause enough. They take her purse anyway. Daniels dumps the contents onto the patrol car's hood. Wallet, tissues, lipstick, reading glasses, phone, and a small framed photo of her family scatter across the hot metal surface. Margaret reaches for the photo as it slides toward the edge. Miller blocks her. Don't touch anything. The frame falls, glass shattering on the pavement. Margaret's son's face smiles up from the cracked frame. That's my family. Her voice trembles. ID fraud is a family business now? Daniels picks through her wallet, removing cards, examining each with exaggerated scrutiny. Margaret notices her hand shaking. She clasps them together to hide her humiliation. Social Security cards don't look like this anymore, Miller says, though Margaret's card is perfectly authentic. That card was issued in 1968. Her patience wears thin. Convenient excuse. Miller places her belongings in an evidence bag, including her phone. Margaret's stomach tightens. The emergency call had connected. Her son would have heard everything. A third officer arrives. Johnson surveys the scene, immediately deferring to his colleague's assessment without questioning. Ma'am, we're taking you in for questioning regarding identity fraud. Margaret straightens her spine. I want to speak to my attorney. The officers exchange amused glances. You have an attorney on retainer? Daniels snickers. I do. Margaret's voice finds new strength. And he's very good at his job. Officer Johnson steps closer, intimidating. Until then, you'll come with us. Margaret feels the stares of onlookers. Some film with their phones. None intervene. Sandra emerges from the bank holding paperwork. Her account shows unusual activity, large deposits quarterly from Washington. Government fraud, too? Miller raises his eyebrows. That's federal territory. Margaret almost laughs. If only they knew the source of those deposits. As they prepare to handcuff her, Margaret speaks clearly. Before you continue, I suggest you check my other identification. What other ID? We've seen your fake driver's license and passport. Margaret stands tall. The one my son insists I carry in the hidden compartment of my wallet. When Officer Daniels reluctantly checks, his face drains of color as he reads the emergency contact information on the special government-issued family ID. The atmosphere shifts as Daniels stares at the ID card, suddenly unsure. He shows it to Miller, whose cocky demeanor falters. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., Attorney General Elijah Thompson is concluding a meeting when his security detail interrupts. "Sir, you have an emergency call from your mother's panic button." Elijah's expression hardens as he listens to the audio transmission. His mother's voice, the officer's dismissive tones, the sound of her belongings scattered across a car hood. He hears everything. "Get me the police chief in that jurisdiction. Now!" His voice remains measured but cold. "And prepare my plane." Back at the bank, Margaret notices the change in the officer's behavior. "This says your emergency contact is..." Miller trails off. "My son, Elijah Thompson." Margaret's voice carries quiet strength. Johnson shakes his head. "That can't be right. The Attorney General?" "The same." Margaret meets his gaze. "My son values family above all else." Daniels fumbles with his radio, steps away to make a call. His posture changes from authoritative to defensive. Margaret uses their distraction to assess the damage. Her belongings remain scattered, her dignity challenged, her community failed to stand up for her. She makes a silent vow. This treatment won't happen to anyone else at this bank. Inside, Sandra watches with growing concern. The manager appears beside her, questioning the police presence. Brian, the teller, approaches them nervously. "Her account details check out. She's been a customer for decades, premium account holder." The manager's face pales. "Why wasn't I informed immediately?" Brian swallows hard. "Sandra said she matched a fraud profile." "What profile?" the manager demands. Sandra stammers. "She wanted to withdraw a large sum. It seemed suspicious." "Because she's elderly? Black." The manager's voice rises. Outside, Daniels returns, his demeanor completely transformed. "Mrs. Thompson, there seems to have been a misunderstanding." Margaret says nothing. The time for explanations has passed. "We'll need to verify this ID, of course," Miller adds weakly. "Of course you will." Margaret's voice is ice. "And while you're at it, perhaps explain why my valid identification was insufficient before you knew who my son was." Johnson begins gathering her belongings, handling them with new care. Daniel's radio crackles. The voice on the other end sounds urgent. Margaret knows that voice. Elijah's distinctive tone carries authority even through the static. The officer's face drains of color as he listens. "Yes, sir. Understood, sir. Right away, sir." The patrol car's lights shut off. The evidence bag opens. Margaret's belongings return to her hands with apologies, but it's too late for sorry. 30,000 feet above, the Attorney General's plane changes course, heading directly toward his mother, and a reckoning none of these officers are prepared to face. News travels fast in small towns. Within an hour, local media vans appear outside the bank. Someone leaked that something big is happening. Inside the bank, the manager scrambles. "Get Mrs. Thompson into my office immediately. Full privacy." Sandra protests. She was trying to withdraw an unusual amount. "She's a premium client with over $1 million in assets with us," the manager hisses. "And you called the police because?" Sandra falters. "She didn't look like she could have that kind of money." The manager stares in disbelief. "I'll deal with you later." Outside, Officers Daniels and Miller receive increasingly frantic calls from their superior. "Do you have any idea who you've detained?" the police chief's voice booms through the radio. "The Attorney General himself called our department." Margaret sits calmly on a bench, declining offers to wait inside. "I prefer to stay where everyone can see what happens next," she tells them. The officers hover nervously nearby, no longer detaining her but unwilling to leave the scene. Daniels approaches hesitantly. "Mrs. Thompson, we were just doing our jobs." Margaret looks through him. "Your job is to protect and serve all citizens equally." Miller joins, defensive. "We had reports of fraud." "From whom?" Margaret challenges. "The bank teller who decided I didn't look like I belonged?" Neither officer answers. More patrol cars arrive. The police chief emerges, straightening his uniform before approaching Margaret. "Mrs. Thompson, on behalf of our department, I extend my sincerest apologies for this unfortunate incident." Margaret's response is measured. "Unfortunate" suggests accident. This was deliberate profiling. The chief's smile falters. "I assure you we'll conduct a full investigation." "So will my son," Margaret replies. Social media buzzes with partial videos of the incident. Comments flood in. "Another case of banking while black," and "Wait until they find out who she is." The bank manager emerges, sweat beading on his forehead. "Mrs. Thompson, please come inside. We've prepared everything for your withdrawal." As Margaret finally enters the bank, a sleek black government vehicle pulls into the parking lot, followed by 3 more, and the real storm hasn't even begun. The government vehicles form a perimeter around the bank entrance. Men and women in suits with earpieces create a corridor of authority. Inside, the bank manager personally counts out Margaret's withdrawal, hands shaking. "Mrs. Thompson, I want to assure you that First National values all our customers. This incident doesn't reflect our policies." Margaret accepts the cash, placing it carefully in her purse. "Yet it happened in your bank, under your supervision." Sandra has been removed from the floor. Through the office blinds, Margaret sees her gesturing frantically to HR personnel. Brian, the teller, approaches cautiously. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm truly sorry. I should have verified your account before involving security." Margaret studies him. "Yes, you should have." The manager interjects. "We're prepared to offer compensation for your distress." "I don't want your money," Margaret interrupts. "I want systemic change." A commotion outside draws everyone's attention. The bank falls silent as Attorney General Elijah Thompson enters, flanked by his security detail and assistants carrying briefcases. At 6'4", Elijah commands the room instantly. His tailored suit and deliberate movements speak of power held with responsibility. The police chief rushes forward. "Attorney General Thompson, we're handling the situation." "Are you?" Elijah's voice cuts through excuses. His focus remains on his mother. He crosses to Margaret, concern breaking through his professional facade. "Mom, are you all right?" For the first time, Margaret's composure wavers. She pats his hand. "I'm fine, Elijah. But others might not be so fortunate." Elijah turns to his team. Full investigation, bank policies, police response, individual actions, everything. One assistant steps forward. "Sir, we've already pulled 7 similar complaints against this branch in the past year." The manager pales. "Those were resolved through settlements and NDAs," the assistant finishes. "Not anymore." Officers Daniels and Miller attempt to blend into the background. Elijah notices. "Officers, my team will need your badge numbers and full statements." The local news crews outside multiply. National outlets have picked up the story. Attorney General's mother profiled at bank. As Elijah guides his mother toward the exit, he whispers something that makes her smile for the first time today. Something about teaching a masterclass in consequences. The bank's regional director arrives breathless, having broken speed limits to get there. He finds the lobby transformed into an impromptu command center. Department of Justice staff set up workstations. Officials interview employees and review security footage. The bank's computer systems undergo audit. The regional director seeks out Elijah. Attorney General Thompson, surely we can handle this privately. Elijah looks up from reviewing documents. Like the previous incidents were handled, with silence and payoffs? Margaret sits nearby, observing. She notices Sandra being escorted to a private room for questioning. Her earlier confidence completely vanished. Outside, community members gather. Word has spread about what happened to Miss Margaret, a beloved former school teacher who tutored generations of local children. Former students arrive with handmade signs, "Justice for Miss Margaret," and "End banking discrimination now." The police chief attempts damage control with the media. This was an isolated incident. He's interrupted by community voices shouting incidents of their own. "They did the same to my grandfather. I was denied a loan 6 times with perfect credit." Margaret watches through the window, her personal humiliation transforming into something larger. This isn't just about her anymore. Elijah approaches his mother. "The Federal Banking Commission is sending representatives. This branch's practices warrant full review." Margaret nods. "What about the officers?" "Administrative leave, pending investigation." Elijah's expression darkens. "Their body cameras conveniently malfunctioned during your encounter." "Convenient indeed." Margaret straightens her pearl necklace. "What happens next?" "Justice happens next." Elijah checks his watch. The bank's CEO is landing in 20 minutes. The police commissioner in 30. The regional director overhears, panic evident. "The CEO is coming here? Today?" When the Attorney General's mother is profiled and humiliated, people tend to clear their schedules. Elijah's tone leaves no room for discussion. Margaret stands, smoothing her skirt. "I should freshen up before meeting the CEO." As she heads to the restroom, bank employees watch in silence. The woman they dismissed hours ago now commands more respect than their highest executives. In the privacy of the bathroom, Margaret finally allows herself a moment of emotion. Not for her own ordeal, but for the revelation of how many others suffered without the power of a son in high office. The bank's atmosphere crackles with tension as the CEO of First National Banking Corporation, Harrison Edwards, strides through the doors. His tailored suit and confident demeanor suggest a man accustomed to controlling rooms, not answering to them. Behind him follows Police Commissioner Davis, whose military posture contrasts with the anxiety in his eyes. They find Attorney General Thompson reviewing evidence with his team. The Justice Department's efficiency has already compiled a damning report. "Attorney General," Edwards extends his hand, "this unfortunate incident—" "Was neither unfortunate nor isolated," Elijah interrupts, not taking the offered hand. "My team has identified 27 similar incidents at your branches nationwide in the past year alone." Edwards falters. "I wasn't aware." "That's the problem." Elijah gestures to the stack of complaints. "Your bank settled these quietly. No policy changes, no accountability." Margaret returns, composed and regal. Edwards immediately approaches her. "Mrs. Thompson, please accept my personal apology for your experience today." Margaret studies him. "Do you know why I was withdrawing money, Mr. Edwards?" The CEO hesitates. "I understand it was for your grandson's tuition." "Partially correct." Margaret opens her purse, retrieving an elegant business card. "The Thompson Family Foundation is establishing a scholarship fund for underprivileged students. Today's withdrawal was the first installment." Edwards examines the card, recognition dawning. The Thompson Foundation, a powerful philanthropic organization with assets exceeding $50 million. "You're that Margaret Thompson?" His voice barely contains his shock. "The very same." Margaret's smile doesn't reach her eyes. "Former Chief Financial Officer of Westland Industries, before my retirement." The revelation ripples through the room. The elderly woman they profiled isn't just the Attorney General's mother. She's a financial powerhouse in her own right. "I started as a bank teller in 1968, Margaret continues, Worked my way through night school while raising Elijah alone after my husband died. Became the first black female CFO in our state's history. Commissioner Davis clears his throat. Mrs. Thompson, had our officers known, that's precisely the problem. Margaret cuts him off. Respect shouldn't depend on status or connections. Elijah steps forward. My mother sits on the Federal Reserve Advisory Council. She helped draft banking regulations you operate under, Mr. Edwards. The CEO pales visibly. And yet, Elijah continues, she was treated like a criminal in your establishment because of assumptions based on her age and race. Margaret addresses the room. I could have presented my credentials immediately. I chose not to. Why? Sandra asks from the edge of the gathering. Because no one should need impressive titles to be treated with basic dignity. Margaret's voice carries decades of wisdom. Today revealed the treatment ordinary citizens receive. The Assistant Attorney General approaches with a tablet. Sir, we've compiled the initial report. Systematic discrimination patterns are evident. Edwards attempts to regain control. Whatever policy adjustments are needed, this goes beyond policy adjustments. Elijah's tone is final. The Department of Justice is opening a formal investigation into discriminatory practices at First National Bank. The CEO stiffens. On what grounds? Violation of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, the Fair Housing Act, and potentially the Civil Rights Act. Elijah lists each charge deliberately. And that's before addressing the police misconduct. Commissioner Davis interjects. The officers were responding to a reported fraud. With excessive force and clear bias, Elijah finishes. Their body cameras mysteriously malfunctioned only during this encounter. Outside, the crowd has grown. Community members share stories of similar treatment. News crews broadcast live. Margaret watches it all, her banker's mind calculating the impact. Your stock will drop 15 points by morning, Mr. Edwards. The CEO knows she's right. As Margaret prepares to leave with her son, she turns to the assembled bank leadership with one final revelation. By the way, I've served on your bank's board of directors selection committee for the past decade, and your term review is next month. 1 week later, the consequences unfold with the precision of dominoes falling. First National Bank's stock plummets 18%, worse than Margaret predicted. Shareholders demand answers. The board calls an emergency meeting. At Justice Department headquarters, Elijah leads a briefing on the widening investigation. We've received over 200 new complaints since news broke. He gestures to the map showing affected branches nationwide, pattern and practice of discrimination, particularly against elderly minorities. His team presents evidence. Internal bank memos encouraging scrutiny of unusual withdrawals with coded language about non-typical account holders. Meanwhile, Margaret hosts community leaders in her modest home. The living room transforms into a command center for systemic change. It's not enough to punish individuals, Margaret tells them. We need to change how financial institutions operate. Across town, officers Daniels and Miller face separate disciplinary hearings. Body camera footage from prior incidents reveals a pattern of selective enforcement. Daniels argues, we were following training protocols for fraud prevention. The review board chairperson responds, yet white customers making identical transactions faced no such scrutiny. At First National's headquarters, CEO Edwards faces the board's fury. This PR disaster has cost us millions, one board member fumes. Major institutional investors are threatening to divest. Edwards defends himself. How could I know every incident at every branch? That's literally your job, another board member counters. And Mrs. Thompson isn't just anyone. She literally helped write banking regulations. Sandra, the bank manager who initiated the incident, clears her desk under security supervision. Her termination letter cites violation of customer dignity protocols and discriminatory actions. Brian, the teller, receives different news. His honest testimony about systematic bias earns him whistleblower protection and a transfer to corporate compliance. Margaret declines all media interviews except one, with a local high school journalism student whose grandmother faced similar discrimination. "This isn't about revenge," Margaret explains. "It's about reform." The Justice Department investigation expands to 3 more national banks with similar complaint patterns. Elijah recuses himself from direct involvement due to personal connection, but his top deputies press forward. Banking regulators announce emergency audits of complaint records and dispute resolutions across the financial sector. First National announces a comprehensive plan: implicit bias training, transaction review overhaul, community accountability panels, and a $50 million commitment to underserved communities. Too little, too late. Class action lawsuits emerge. The bank's legal team warns of potential 9-figure settlements. At police headquarters, Commissioner Davis implements new protocols for responding to financial institutions. Verification before action becomes the mandate. Margaret uses her position on financial boards to push for industry-wide change. Her proposal: blind transaction reviews, customer advocacy offices with real authority, and financial literacy programs in underserved communities. The Thompson Family Foundation announces a new initiative: legal support for victims of financial discrimination nationwide. In a private meeting with Elijah, Margaret reviews the investigation's progress. "The systemic issues run deeper than we thought," Elijah explains. "Their algorithms flagged accounts with specific withdrawal patterns as high risk when the account holders were minorities, but not for white customers with identical patterns." Margaret nods. "Technology embedded with the same biases as its creators." "Exactly. And we found email chains where executives explicitly discussed burying complaints to avoid regulatory scrutiny." Margaret sips her tea. "Any resistance from other banks?" "Initially, until we showed them the data. Now they're falling over themselves to implement voluntary reforms before we compel them." The fallout extends beyond banking. Police departments nationwide review their response protocols for calls from businesses. Training modules now include case studies on implicit bias in commercial settings. Sandra struggles to find new employment. Her interview at a smaller bank ends abruptly when the hiring manager recognizes her name from news coverage. Officers Daniels and Miller receive formal reprimands in their personnel files. Their union representation argues against termination, securing their jobs but ensuring they'll never advance beyond their current ranks. Edwards faces a shareholder revolt. The board chair calls him at home. "We need your resignation by morning. The damage control can't begin with you still at the helm." The Thompson case becomes required reading in business ethics courses. Harvard Business School develops a case study: "When bias meets banking, the true cost of discrimination." Margaret's phone rings constantly with invitations to speak at financial conferences, civil rights events, and corporate training sessions. She accepts selectively, focusing on forums where policy changes happen. Elijah's political capital grows. His principled handling of his mother's case demonstrates his commitment to equal justice regardless of personal connection. First National's competitors seize the opportunity, launching targeted marketing campaigns emphasizing their commitment to dignity for all customers. Account transfers from First National surge. Brian receives a promotion to lead a new customer advocacy division, reporting directly to the board rather than management. His first initiative: anonymous transaction audits to eliminate bias. The financial industry's trade publications debate the Thompson effect. One editorial reads, "The question isn't whether your institution has bias, it's whether you'll address it before your own Margaret Thompson walks through your door." As bank executives across the country review their vulnerability to similar scandals, they discover something alarming. Margaret Thompson sits on advisory boards for regulatory agencies overseeing each of them. 60 days after the incident, a Senate Banking Committee hearing convenes. Marble columns and wood paneling create an atmosphere of gravitas as cameras broadcast nationwide. CEO Edwards occupies the witness table, flanked by nervous attorneys. Sweat beads on his forehead under the harsh lights. Senator Claudia Morales leads the questioning. Mr. Edwards, your bank's internal documents show systematic targeting of minority customers for enhanced scrutiny. Was this official policy? Edwards adjusts his tie. Absolutely not. These were isolated incidents of employees misinterpreting fraud prevention guidelines. Interesting. The senator holds up a document. This memo from your executive team refers to demographic risk factors in transaction approval. Please explain. Edwards stumbles through jargon-filled excuses. The committee remains unimpressed. In the audience, Margaret sits composed, watching the man who once commanded the financial world reduced to defensive mumbling. During a recess, Edwards approaches her cautiously. Mrs. Thompson, surely we can find resolution without destroying an institution that serves millions. Margaret's response is measured. Institutions that discriminate don't truly serve anyone, Mr. Edwards. The hearing resumes with testimony from former customers. Their stories form a damning pattern, identical to Margaret's experience but without her resources or connections. Commissioner Davis faces his own reckoning before the Civil Rights Commission. Body camera reviews reveal a department-wide pattern of different response standards based on caller demographics. Officers responded with full tactical teams to reports from affluent areas, the commission chair notes, while similar calls from minority neighborhoods received delayed or minimal response. Davis offers his resignation effective immediately. Back at the Senate hearing, Edwards attempts damage control. We've implemented comprehensive reforms, Senator Morales interrupts. After getting caught, your bank had hundreds of complaints before Mrs. Thompson's incident. The only difference was her son's position. Edwards has no answer. The committee announces its findings: sanctions against First National Bank, mandatory compliance audits, and referrals to the Justice Department for potential criminal charges against specific executives who buried complaints. That evening, First National's board votes unanimously. Edwards is terminated, effective immediately. His golden parachute shrinks as clawback provisions activate due to leadership failures resulting in regulatory action. Officers Daniels and Miller receive their verdicts: termination, loss of pension eligibility, and permanent notation in law enforcement databases preventing future police employment. Sandra, the bank manager, finds herself unemployable in financial services. Her name becomes a case study in banking ethics courses. The bank's regional director faces federal charges for destroying evidence of previous discrimination complaints. Community activists celebrate these individual consequences, but focus on Margaret's bigger mission: systemic reform. National news covers the story's resolution. A prominent anchor concludes, "The swift fall of banking titan Harrison Edwards sends a clear message to corporate America. Discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's financially catastrophic." Margaret watches the coverage from home, her satisfaction tempered by awareness that most victims lack her advantages. Elijah calls. "The president is considering an executive order on financial inclusion based on our recommendations." "Good," Margaret responds. "But legislation would be better. Executive orders change with administrations." "Already working on it," Elijah assures her. "Senator Morales is drafting a bill now." As the old guard falls, financial institutions scramble to avoid being the next target, unaware that Margaret has already provided the Justice Department with insider information on discriminatory practices at 3 more major banks. 1 year later, the financial landscape looks markedly different. Margaret's experience has catalyzed change beyond individual penalties. The Banking Equality Act passes with bipartisan support, establishing new standards for financial institutions. Anonymous transaction review protocols that remove demographic indicators. Mandatory reporting of all service refusals and their justifications. Customer advocates with real authority in every branch. Quarterly bias audits with public results. First National Bank, under new leadership, transforms into an industry model. Their community banking initiative opens branches in previously underserved neighborhoods. Hiring practices prioritize staff reflecting community demographics. Margaret chairs the Federal Financial Inclusion Commission, a new regulatory body with oversight authority. Her decades of financial expertise, combined with personal experience, make her uniquely qualified. Law enforcement undergoes similar transformation. New training protocols focus on equitable response regardless of neighborhood or caller demographics. Body cameras now activate automatically when officers respond to financial institutions. The Thompson Foundation establishes a banking rights hotline, providing immediate legal assistance to anyone experiencing discrimination. Their cases decrease month by month as reforms take hold. Former Officer Daniels, now working security at a shopping mall, watches news coverage of the changes. His perspective has evolved from defensiveness to reluctant understanding. Brian, the teller who spoke up, now leads First National's compliance department. His team reviews transaction patterns for bias indicators, addressing problems before they become incidents. In community centers nationwide, financial literacy programs flourish. Margaret personally teaches a monthly class for seniors navigating modern banking. Police Commissioner Davis's replacement, a former civil rights attorney, implements community oversight boards with actual disciplinary authority. The Justice Department's Banking Discrimination Task Force, inspired by Margaret's case, recovers over $500 million for victims of systematic discrimination across the financial sector. Edwards, the former CEO, attempts to rehabilitate his image through philanthropic giving. His applications to serve on corporate boards receive consistent rejection. Sandra, working at a small retail shop, watches customers carefully count their money. She recognizes faces from her banking days. People she once dismissed now avoid her register. At the annual Banking Industry Conference, Margaret receives a standing ovation as she presents the new inclusive banking standards. Some executives applaud reluctantly, aware that resistance would be both futile and revealing. Dignity isn't a privilege reserved for the powerful, Margaret tells the audience. It's a right belonging to everyone who walks through your doors. As banking executives implement changes mandated by the new regulations, their data reveals an unexpected truth-inclusive banking practices actually increase profits by expanding loyal customer bases. 2 years after the incident, Margaret sits in a different bank branch in the same town. The space has been redesigned open, welcoming, with privacy areas for all transactions. Her grandson, now in his second year of college, accompanies her. His scholarship fund, established through the Thompson Foundation, supports 15 students from underserved communities. The young teller greets Margaret with genuine respect. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson. How can I assist you today?" Margaret completes her transaction smoothly. No questions about her identification, no suspicious glances, just professional service. Outside, she notices Officer Johnson, the third officer from that day directing traffic. He's undergone the mandatory retraining, now serving as the department's community liaison. He notices Margaret and nods respectfully. She returns the gesture without bitterness. Accountability has been achieved. Grudges serve no purpose. At her modest home, community leaders gather for their monthly strategy meeting. What began as response to one incident has evolved into ongoing civic engagement. Margaret serves tea in her living room. Our work isn't finished, but the foundation is stronger. Her phone rings Elijah calling from Washington. She puts him on speaker. "The President is signing the National Financial Inclusion Act tomorrow," he announces. "Your testimony made the difference, Mom." Margaret smiles. "Not just mine. Everyone who shared their stories." Later, she visits First National Bank's main branch, now a community banking center with financial literacy classes and small business support services. Brian, promoted to Regional Director of Community Banking, gives her a tour. Applications for first-time business loans are up 340% in minority communities. Margaret examines the new transaction protocols on his tablet. Customer photos no longer appear during initial reviews. Accounts are evaluated on financial metrics alone. The system works better for everyone now, Brian explains. Even our shareholders are happier. A plaque in the lobby commemorates the transformation. Dignity and respect for every customer. Below it, a smaller inscription. Inspired by Margaret Thompson. She runs her fingers over the words, remembering that day's humiliation, now transformed into lasting change. At the police academy, new recruits study the Thompson case as mandatory curriculum. They learn about implicit bias, equitable enforcement, and the consequences of selective justice. Sandra, who lost her banking career, now works at the community center. Her role, teaching financial professionals about the human impact of discrimination. Her first-hand experience proves valuable, her redemption earned through genuine contrition and effort. Margaret drives home past the spot where officers once surrounded her. The memory no longer stings. The sidewalk where her family photo shattered now features a small community garden. At home, she places fresh flowers beside her late husband's photo. "We did good work today, James." She opens her laptop to work on her memoir, Banking on Dignity, How One Incident Changed an Industry. Publishers competed fiercely for the rights. The evening news features a story about another bank's community initiative, inspired by First National's success. The movement spreads, driven by both moral imperative and proven profitability. Margaret's phone buzzes with a message from her grandson. "Grandma, my professor used your case study in class today." She smiles, remembering something her mother told her decades ago. True power isn't about making people fear you. It's about making systems work justly for everyone. The lesson endures. Dignity isn't negotiable. Justice delayed isn't justice denied if it leads to lasting change. And sometimes, the most powerful response to discrimination isn't revenge. It's reform. As Margaret's story reaches millions through her memoir and news coverage, the impact spreads beyond banking and law enforcement into other industries. Healthcare providers review their triage protocols after reports surface of similar bias patterns. Retail chains implement blind shopper audits to ensure consistent service. Educational institutions examine their disciplinary records for demographic disparities. Margaret appears on a national morning show, poised and dignified in the same pearl necklace she wore that fateful day. What would you tell someone facing discrimination without an attorney general for a son? The host asks. Margaret smiles. Document everything. Connect with advocacy groups. Remember your worth doesn't depend on others' recognition. And know that for every Margaret Thompson with connections, we are building systems to support those without them. Social media campaigns spread her wisdom. #Dignity for all and #banking. While Black become rallying points for continued vigilance and reform. The former bank building where the incident occurred has been renovated into a community financial center. Its new mission statement, prominently displayed. Financial dignity is a universal right. Officer Daniels, working his mall security job, watches a teenager being unfairly accused of shoplifting. His new perspective leads him to intervene differently than he once would have. Small changes ripple outward. Margaret establishes a scholarship for ethics in law enforcement, available to children of police officers who demonstrate commitment to equitable justice. The Thompson Foundation launches a mobile app where users can report and track discrimination incidents, creating data patterns that drive further reforms. First National Bank becomes the most profitable in its class, disproving critics who claimed inclusive practices would hurt bottom lines. Other institutions race to adopt similar models. Elijah continues his work as Attorney General, his perspective forever shaped by his mother's experience. Policy reforms bear the subtle hallmark of personal understanding. Margaret's story becomes a case study in business schools and law enforcement academies nationwide. Students debate the ethical implications and systemic changes required for true equality. At community meetings, citizens share their own stories of standing up against bias. The conversation continues, each voice strengthening the movement. Did Margaret's journey move you? This is just one of countless stories of dignity, power, and transformation. Every week, we bring you true tales of everyday people standing up against injustice and creating lasting change. Stories that make you think, feel, and most importantly, act. Hit that like button if you believe in dignity for all. Subscribe to Beat Stories for more powerful narratives that prove one person can transform broken systems. Turn on notifications so you never miss our new releases every Thursday. Comment below with your own story of standing up against bias or discrimination. Your voice matters here.
You've seen the story. Now what will you do with it? At Beat Stories, we believe reflection is good, but action is better. Subscribe, share, speak, because awareness is only the first step.